We kick off with the Arrow 1, a rocket 4.5 years in the making, the first manned craft going into space. Unfortunately, things go wrong. They manage to misplace their gigantic rocket, off the radar and out of contact with the crew. No idea where it's gone. When we pick up after the commercial break, the commander of the mission, Colonel Donlin, is writing the log about how 4 of them died in the crash landing, another is injured. He thinks they're on an asteroid. We'll get into that later. But Corey here is not interested in updating the logs.
Begging the Colonel's pardon, but this is no time to write your memoirs.
Corey, we're in bad shape, that's for sure. But we're still a crew. And as long as we are a crew, there'll be discipline and there'll be protocol.
Well, unless the protocol is freaking out, Corey is a problem. Pearson, the other able-bodied survivor, is seeing to their wounded comrade, and giving him water irritates Corey that it's a waste, which settles things. He is no longer in charge of crew morale. They bury the dead, but the failure to find anything on a recon run exacerbates Corey's fear, and he fights to stop more water being given to the injured man. It's pointless, the guy's already dead, and a new fight starts with Pearson this time when he catches Corey trying to slip the canteen from the cadaver for himself. The plan is to do some further recon, but only Corey returns, with a mostly full canteen.
What about Pearson?
Not for long if he keeps spilling it all over himself. Donlin interrupts his impromptu baptism. Clearly, this guy has stolen Pearson's canteen. Corey finally insists, yeah, but he was just lying there. He must have fallen. So he took it and lied because he knew Donlin wouldn't believe him. Which is true, he doesn't. He makes Corey show him at gunpoint where the body is, except it's not there. Donlin figures that dead actually meant he was lying there and didn't protest when I stole his canteen. Sure enough, he finds Pearson, who's still alive, though mortally wounded, who draws a shape of what he saw, 2 parallel lines and another intersecting them. After he dies, Donlin goes to check, leaving the gun with Corey. Well, the inevitable happens, and Corey shoots him so he can have all the supplies to himself. This is so bad, Rod Serling begins taunting him as he's climbing the mountain.
Make tracks, Mr. Corey. Push up and push out, because if you stop, maybe sanity will get you by the throat.
With even the narrator turning against him, Corey finally sees what Pearson had drawn, a telephone pole alongside a busy road. He's overjoyed at knowing he's going to be saved, only to break down as he's overwhelmed by the realization, oh yeah, they might have questions about the guys I murdered. But the one comfort he can take is that this world is not ruled by damn dirty apes. Rod Serling was contractually obligated to write 80% of the scripts for the Twilight Zone. For the rest, he always wanted to champion new writers, so he put the word out. Even if you have no experience, send it in. According to the Twilight Zone companion, Serling said, I got 14,000 manuscripts in the first 5 days. Of the 14,000, I and members of my staff read about 500. And 498 of those 500 were absolute trash. Hand-scrawled, laboriously written, therapeutic pieces of writing from sick people. Of the 2 remaining scripts, both of professional quality, neither fitted the show. He finally settled on some established writers, but as you can imagine, he was needed to come up with lots of story ideas. This one he got at a party. Madelon Champion suggested, astronauts crash land outside of Las Vegas but think it's another planet. Serling paid her $500 for the idea, and the story by for this episode, along with its radio adaptation, are her sole creative credit. This episode predates human spaceflight, and it shows. It has a pulp sci-fi aspect to it. We'll list some of it, simply to acknowledge him, though we won't hold it against the episode, since again, human space travel was still only in the imagination. First, the 8-man crew. That is a number so large that it has only ever been done once, a quarter-century after this episode aired, in the final successful launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger, 3 months before its famous tragedy. While future Atlantis missions landed with that many, no one has yet launched that many at once. And there's an important reason. Every person needs to be mission critical. You are sending up the weight of a fully grown human, plus all the air, food, and water that human needs for the duration of the mission. Rocketry's all about weight, so you don't have an 8-man crew unless there's a job only 8 people can do. Second, the failure of astronaut screening. Astronauts need intense physical, mental, and emotional discipline because they will be in the most hostile environment humans have entered short of the ocean floor. A man this incapable of handling being lost, facing possible death, would not have passed through any space program. Third, the fact they could survive outside their suits meant this had to be Earth. The presence of oxygen means water because that's what plants or physical processes use in order to create it. The gravity being correct, that means this isn't an asteroid, it's a planet. The temperature is warm, but not enough to threaten life. Any astronaut should know this had to be Earth simply by process of elimination. No other place would meet all those criteria in our solar system. Leaving all that aside, though, the episode is nearly 65 years old. The Colonel makes some dubious decisions. There are reasons to bury the dead, certainly, to avoid attracting animals and insects, and possibly for the morale of not looking at your colleagues rotting. But in an arid environment with limited resources, simply placing them elsewhere respectfully should have been enough, not having them dig 4 holes with a collapsible field shovel when food and water for energy are in such limited supply. His response to 50% of his able-bodied force suffering morale problems is aggression. Corey's lamentation that Donlin should devote his energy towards keeping them alive and getting in contact for a rescue isn't wrong, and the lack of any assurance, implicit or explicit, that the Colonel is going to prioritize survival exacerbates the problem. And while I'm obviously not defending his behavior, why wouldn't Corey start fearing every action that denies life-saving resources if their leader shows no sign that he cares about it? We won't even get into the gun. All in all, even allowing for the fact they should have known they were on Earth, this was a doomed crew to begin with. Serling hints at what happened with the title, I Shot an Arrow into the Air, which in the poem is followed by, It fell to earth, I know not where. Yes, they just fell to earth and didn't know it. It is interesting to consider how much of a difference knowing where you are, what your place is in the world, changes the situation entirely. Corey is shown as a cautionary tale, the ease for despair to drive the human mind to extremes, to descend even to murder if they believe it's the only way to survive, even if it isn't. Corey constructed a house of cards about being trapped and helpless and not enough water, and from there meted out death, only for reality to arrive and knock it all down. The peril existed only in his mind. A reasonable belief, but that is the truth. The peril wasn't real after all, and yet he murdered in the name of it. Fascinating thing to consider. His highly developed brain, capable of comprehending the scope of the peril, responded by throwing aside the unity that is the foundation of humanity's thriving, and instead became a savage. Looking upon civilization, the mere sight of it, of the morality and justice and communal values that are its foundation, Corey has finally found his place, only to remember that the place he desperately wanted to reach has no room for a savage, in or out of the Twilight Zone.